The enemy was cool and scary, and it felt really good to defeat it. You feel like it's your victory when you beat those challenges, and you feel like it's your defeat when they beat you. And you'll keep coming back because you didn't lose by being cheated. You didn't lose because the game did something unfair. You lost because you weren't quite good enough. And all of the great games sit right on that edge.
Jonathan Simus Blackley, the gentleman there in the background, is a co-founder of the original Xbox, and his words were directed at an Atari 2600 game, Yar's Revenge, from 1982. That sentence stuck to me as I watched the documentary Atari Game Over, an entertaining film, granted with many faults. Those words you can easily apply to many popular titles today, especially from software games, Souls-like games, considered to be on today's standards the hardcore of the hardcore when it comes to difficulty, especially its newest iteration, Sekiro, and where a lot of discussions regarding difficulty sprouted around the internet. So let's dig deep to discover what happened to games difficulty and how it evolved. We'll look at the history of video games and what it all means in this little journey that I've prepared for you all. Video games have a long history. One way too long to even begin to cover in this specific video, but one that may be tackled in the future. However, to understand games difficulty, we need to go back to the era of arcades. The arcades was the first real push video games had in entering our pop culture, known as the golden age of arcade video games in the late 70s and 80s. Sadly, I was just a little speck in the mind of my parents during this time, but thanks to the magic of research, we can draw some interesting information of how arcades tie in to the difficulty of games and how it changed over time. Pong, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Asteroids, and even later titles like Ninja Gaiden, Battletoads, Contra, and many others are still to today's standards considered extremely hard titles. But their difficulty comes in many shapes and sizes in comparison to modern counterparts. All of these games, especially ones focused to be played on arcades, share a few similar characteristics. No matter the genre, it is all about going through levels and achieve the highest possible scores. Achieving those high scores brought the more competitive side of the player, not only to best yourself at it, but to also beat the scores of your friends and other players. And if that resonated with you, not only as a player but as a person, you would keep on playing it over and over to improve. And we can still find that very much alive today, especially in more competitive games, moving away from scores to be more online-centric. However, there's an earlier barrier that you need to break, and that is the levels. The levels were hard. Even an experienced player today will have a hard time breaking through them. Making a hard but fair game could prove to be difficult. The technology was far from perfect, and games mechanically and graphically were very simple. They could easily tumble to the side of hard but unfair, like E.T., sometimes regarded as the worst video game of all time, that punished you over and over, seemingly without reason, and you as a player clueless to why you kept failing. But the good ones, like the ones mentioned, made you come back over and over again, when you could identify your mistakes to get better. Controls were not perfect nor accurate all the time. Constant checkpoints or saving the game at your own leisure was also a far distant concept, and levels did everything to try and make you fail. Be the enemies that could make you get the dreaded game over screen, or the brutal environment, with your very limited lives and retries. In turn, making you replay levels from the start after each fail, or even the entire game, forcing you to learn it, its mechanics, and in turn, conquer its challenges and adversities over time. This was the norm. There was nothing to compare it to, and games, in essence, were built with arcades in mind. And arcades were a business, a billion-dollar business, and at a point, the biggest entertainment industry in terms of revenue. So the game's goal was to keep you playing more and more, and in turn, pay more and more. Even when games moved away from arcades and into our households in the form of consoles, The same core concepts stayed for years to come. All these games were intended to make you fail, but the good ones made you come back to them and learn them and conquer them. You no longer paid like in an arcade, but you were still buying the cartridges, the games, and this now ancient technology meant they were often not that long. There was a very finite number of levels a game could wield. They were rather short if you knew what you were doing, and as such, the length of them had to be increased somehow to add value, and difficulty was one of the ways that was achieved. But regardless, all of this subsequently created the journey. And I feel that many games nowadays and many of the gaming culture is focused so much in the end game, in the ultimate end goal of finishing a title, and the journey was lost along the way, focusing on instant gratification instead of long-lasting achievements that can be created by overcoming challenges, that can create memories, making you learn the game each and every time you play it, making you get better at it, while at the same time entertaining yourself, be a boss, a level, or what have you. And this aspect isn't just applied in games, it can be an anecdote for real life and how many of us lead them. And so, as games started to move more and more from the arcades and into our homes, Super Nintendos, Genesis, slowly these concepts started to diminish. Some games were still brutally difficult, no doubt about that. Hell, even a Lion King game supposedly based on a kids movie was still frustratingly hard. Even a term going by Nintendo Hard was coined by some of these same games. Not only that, the design ideas of the said games were still very much the same: limited and precious lives, punishing enemies in environment, low amount of checkpoints, making you leave your console on for hours and hours mid-level so you wouldn't have to repeat it.
We are Nintendo Ultimate TV Game System. Aim your zapper gun. You cannot beat us. Even with your robot partner, you cannot beat us. Discover new worlds. You cannot beat us. We are Nintendo. We challenge all players. You cannot beat us.
There's a lot of other smaller aspects in games that made them rather difficult, that differ on a genre-by-genre basis, like FPS games, later in the 90s, required thoroughly exploration of levels to get ammo, weapons, health, the discovery of secrets, and dying made you start it all over again, from scratch. The same can be applied to Castlevania-like games, platformers, and other titles that did require fast reactions from you and made you learn its mechanics in order for you to defeat its challenges, but all with minimal aid from the game itself, and that was another key aspect. The game didn't provide you with a lot of information. It limited itself to present you the world and basic introduction to its mechanics, and the rest was for you to figure it out and find out all by yourself, emphasizing the journey a game could create. Difficulty can be presented in a variety of ways. There's not a single aspect that can be pinpointed accurately. No checkpoints can make a game subjectively hard, since it forces you to repeat levels. The fact that it doesn't actually teach you everything about the game and how to beat its challenges can be considered difficult in it on itself. Maybe a roguelike can be very difficult to you since you are presented with permadeath, or just simply how the game works with its mechanics. All of that can be subjective, but one common theme on all of them is the feeling of satisfaction when you succeed. However, humans, being humans, we like taking shortcuts, and as such, this era of gaming also brought something: cheat codes.
Yo, video game dudes, talk to me! This is Game Genie from Kaloo, the awesome video game enhancer for your Nintendo Entertainment System. Attach it to most of your video games. Double Dragon 3 or Super Mario Bros. 3. You can go to any level, live forever, jump higher, make your own effects, and get radical firepower. Go to any level, jump higher, stay bigger, live forever. Game Genie, the radical video game enhancer.
Cheating has been part of gaming almost since it became popular, and I would say the era of cheating started to die out on the 7th generation of consoles. Finally, when games took the big turn to be more accessible and in a general sense easier, but also the internet came in to fill that role, googling walkthroughs, videos, and etc. But cheat codes might give us some insight as to why this happened. As gaming got more popular at home, there was an untapped market for consoles and games. Games were hard, and as such, many people turned to cheating in order to win certain levels or finish a game entirely. In a way, it was part of the gaming culture at the time, an indirect way to lower difficulty, as difficulty settings were non-existent in most games. Cheat codes were deliberately left in by developers, originally used to test their game in order to bypass its hurdles for a faster testing process. And quickly, the gaming cheating industry emerged, from magazines, game guides, and more, appeasing to the more casual gamer that didn't want it to spend hours and hours in the same level. And as gaming got even more popular, so did cheating, to the point of external software and hardware was used, and in turn, copyright issues started to appear simultaneously. So, as the industry evolved and as we entered the 90s and 2000s, difficulty settings started to become even more common in all games genres, with the typical easy, normal, and hard. Now, in theory, no matter what type of player you are, you could enjoy and finish a game without having to resort to using cheat codes, though they still remained useful, and I'm sure many of you remember the golden age of cheating in GTA. However, difficulty settings are often hard to balance. Not a lot of games, even today, handle difficulty settings perfectly. A lot of it, especially the hard difficulty, tends to be artificial, typically making you take more damage and having to do more, while not changing much in the core gameplay. Still, up to the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox era, we still had games that on a fundamental level can be subjectively hard. Checkpoints could still be far in between. I vividly remember playing Prince of Persia and being limited by water fountains to both save my game and regenerate my health, a system that you pretty much only find in Souls-like games recently. That said, games now started to have more tutorials in place, tooltips, in order to ease the player in. But even in that generation, games didn't handheld you completely, but started to become far more accessible. And a bigger step was further taken as we entered the 8th generation, PS3 and Xbox 360. The culprit of this wasn't just decrease in difficulty on itself. Games mechanics actually got more complex as technology evolved. However, games design changed drastically over time since the early 2000s due to, again, better technology. The classic levels turned to be more organic. The way you progressed through a game changed entirely. They usually had a story attached to them, and they also got much longer. So making you restart your game anytime you died didn't make as much sense anymore. Games also started pointing things to you clearly, how to defeat this enemy, how to progress this area, clearly telling you where to go, what to do all the time. All of that influenced how games were designed and vice versa, and as such, the term hand-holding got ever more prominent in gaming culture, treating us like babies sometimes. FPS games were hit with heavy changes in particular. They got far more linear and straightforward, with systems like passive regenerating health and practically infinite ammo. They also took a turn to provide a more cinematic experience, with the so-called era of modern military shooters. Online modes, as internet technology improved, were now more prominent as well in the overall process of designing a game, taking away partially what made it the single-player experience. And so, a snowball effect rolled in after all those core design changes that started as technology and the average gamer or audience widened. The idea of what a game could be changed completely. The quality of life improvements also had a big impact. Hand-holding, telling you what to do at every turn, were now the norm, and sometimes were taken to extreme levels. Ultimately, the journey of playing a game, the part of what made the games satisfying in beating its challenges, simply wasn't the main driving force anymore. There was other ways, depending on the genre, to grab you, to engage you and compel you to play the game for longer periods of time. And in turn, difficulty in the traditional sense and all that it brought went in the back burner. These changes had positives. It helped the industry grow as a whole, but lower difficulty, the extreme hand-holding, proved that sometimes can ruin a game, and a good example of this is World of Warcraft, a game that originally was all about conquering hardships, long-term goals, and long-lasting achievements in anything that you did. It was then progressively replaced with instant gratification systems, with catch-up mechanics to try and keep everyone in the same playing field, as players protested over time that not every player could reach the end of the content provided. In turn, it made the overall content less meaningful, less worth to chase, as ultimately the journey was replaced by wanting to reach the end quicker and not pushing yourself as hard. And ironically, it separated the community even more with all their different difficulty options. And this example is applicable to a variety of other games. In the end, a balance had to be met, and that could prove to be difficult in this new era. You are now designing a completely different and sometimes complex game to such a broad demographic of users. Where will you draw the line between making a game hard or easy, between making the player feel smart to feel like he's not being helped enough? However, we also had a renaissance or resurgence in gaming, in bringing back its hardship roots, with no fears of not appealing to everyone. And technology now allowed for even bigger fairness, with the most intricate systems to date. And as such, it was when Demon Souls, Dark Souls, and all subsequent Souls-like titles it inspired started to crop up. Games where their main goal was to provide the players those feelings of achievement, of satisfaction, of overcoming adversities, that was now mostly lost. Checkpoints now worked in a similar way to older titles, making you repeat part of the levels anytime you failed, during a time where checkpoints in games happened almost every minute, even during fights and bosses. Mechanics that were meant for you to explore, test, and learn as you play. It brought the journey of playing a game back in the fold, but retaining some of the quality of life improvements, such as constantly saving your progress, but also providing a well-rounded experience from story, graphics, or blending in with some genre like RPG, action. These games proved that traditional difficulty still had a place in modern culture of gaming. Even some 2D games went back to their roots, especially with the rise of indies like Cuphead, Super Meat Boy, and others. Roguelikes like Isaac, Dead Cells, all these games captivated people, sold millions, and influenced gaming and its developers across all genres. That is okay for your game to have some challenges to overcome. Difficulty on itself has now become almost a genre, is how we describe certain games, and it might not appeal to everyone, but that is the beauty of current gaming, with all of its faults from microtransactions, exclusivity, games as a service. No matter what type of player you are, you for sure will find something that you like. The amount of creative art forms out there are endless. Game creators can produce almost anything they can imagine, be a cinematic story with minimal gameplay, such as Quantic Dream games, or a game more focused around providing feelings of achievement when overcoming challenges, or something in between. No matter if you're the type of person that wants to use gaming as a way to escape life and relax for a couple of hours, or if you're seeking to be entertained while at the same time conquering difficulties, climbing that mountain, hard work after hard work in the comfort of your chair, working for that win, improving, adapting, learning new things, and finally completing the journey. That feeling of satisfaction, of fulfillment, there's nothing like it. And though I don't want to force that on people, you do you, but when playing this style of games, insisting on not giving up, trust me that you will be rewarded handsomely in getting good on something that you truly care about. But ultimately, we live in a time where there is a game for almost everyone, and that is simply amazing.